I want to kind of focus on two main areas today in terms of, well, actually three. What is involved in getting the meeting with you guys? What's involved in the elements of what is really integral in a pitch? And what is kind of the difference between something that is a good script and something that is really going to go to series? So let me just right off the bat, we've got a lot of new writers here today. We've got some amazingly talented screenwriting students at DePaul, and most of them, if not all of them, don't yet have representation. What is the first step that they take in getting a meeting? Is it, do you have to have an agent or a manager for Nickelodeon, for Kickstart? How do they take that first step with not just your companies, but with companies in general, networks in general?
Well, I think there's, at a production company, the barrier to entry is probably a little bit less than there is for a buyer. But I think because there is so much material out there that it is helpful to have something come vetted through a manager or an agent.
Yeah.
And to get a lot of those people, I think it requires one or two really great samples, because that's going to be one of the things that perhaps you have a great idea, but I really need to read something that you've written before. So I know your taste, I know your writing style. That's something that I think Brian will ask for. If I'm coming in with a pitch as a producer, let's say he likes the pitch, is really interested, the immediate question I'll usually get from Brian or someone like him is, can you send me a writing sample? So I think that's sort of one of the first major steps, is having that key, really interesting, unique sample.
Okay. So we talked just last night briefly a little bit about how too much can actually not be a good thing in the pitches with like leave behinds, or what would, like, for an example of like a writing sample, let's say Samantha is going in to pitch a series, to pitch a pilot. Would it be you want to read a writing sample of an original pilot that writer may have done that they're not necessarily pitching to you, or should it be something within sort of the tone of what the network does, or can it just be anything that just shows off their imagination? What works for you, Brian?
I would say first and foremost, it should be their best piece of material. That would be my number one advice. Whatever you feel is going to present yourself best. This is, a lot of times it's sort of one shot to kind of make an impression.
Yeah.
I think, you should be aware of where you're going into pitch and who you're pitching to. It certainly does not have to be the exact kind of genre or tone of what you're either pitching or what that network or platform is known for.
So that's okay. So like if you're pitching to Nick and you've got like something that is definitely like a, like sort of a racy HBO or Cinemax kind of thing, that's okay to submit as a sample?
Yeah, I mean, at Nickelodeon and where we're focused on developing comedies, and we want to see, so we want to see strong voices, we want to see, an ability to write jokes, we want to see an ability to develop characters, and that can exist in a kids' TV spec, that can exist in a spec for an adult show. If I walk away from reading something like that was really funny, those characters were really specific and fresh, I feel like that can translate into anything.
Oh, that's great. Do you feel the same way, Samantha, that if you kind of see the tools utilized, that that person, you might have something that could possibly be a family-oriented animated series, but if you read maybe a feature spec that was like a little bit more edgy, that you can see like, well, those writing skills can still translate into something that's a different genre.
Absolutely. I think as long as you have someone who's writing really great depth of character, is telling a compelling story. I think, too, a little bit about what Brian was saying, if you're going out to pitch a comedy and you have sort of a sci-fi action thriller, that's not necessarily going to tell me that, for example, you can tell jokes and that sort of pacing. So you probably want at least something that's maybe drama or comedy
Sure.
for the project. But otherwise, yeah, I think the it doesn't have to be the exact same thing that you're pitching. Good writing can sort of display that this person can do something.
So, about 15 years ago, it seemed that the opportunities, or at least the interest in reading original pilots from new writers or writers that hadn't yet established themselves, it wasn't really like in huge demand. But ever since Mark Cherry sold Desperate Housewives as a spec, it seems within the past 10 or 15 years that the opportunities for new writers in selling original pilots is something that is of much greater interest. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I think a lot of that now especially has to do with sort of the explosion of places to take material. I mean, it's obviously been well documented just how many shows there are, how much original content is being produced every year. So there are just so many more opportunities. And the other side of that is there's so much a greater need for material. So while I think everyone is still relying on pitches and sort of the traditional process, you also have to look everywhere, and you have to be open to material, good piece of writing coming from any place.
Brian and Samantha, I'd like to ask you both. Is there like a certain mandate that Kickstart, like for material, is looking for, is not looking for? And the same with Nickelodeon, that you're open to new things, but there's certain areas that you're never really going to be, considering, at least not seriously. Like, what's Pixar? Do they have a mandate?
I think for us, I've kind of put what we're looking for is into like the family or fanboy camp. But we're a very unique production company in that we do film and TV, animation and live action, and for features and TV. So we kind of do everything. So a lot of times what's great about that is someone can come in with an idea and I can say, hey, actually I think that's a feature, not a TV series. So we're fairly unique in that regard, whereas I think a lot of other companies are looking a little more specifically.
Like, or
they might
one
have
camp or another.
Yeah, and they might be servicing a specific deal. Like they have a deal at Fox, and so Fox wants a certain type of project.
But you're not, Kickstart's not tethered to that. You
No.
guys can go to.
We can go wherever, which is, has its benefits and its downfalls. But creatively, it's very freeing.
That's great.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I speak for Nickelodeon, but also I think for networks and platforms in general, especially on the cable side, we have an identity, and it's important to us to develop and air shows that reinforce what our identity is and who we are to kids and who we are to parents. And I think most cable channels would say that they've been very specific about branding themselves and coming with an identity. So when you talk about what shows are right for us or what we're looking for us it has to feel like a Nickelodeon show. I mean, and part of our jobs is to sort of communicate what that means and what would be a Nick show and what wouldn't be a Nick show. There are ideas and pitches that we hear that are good shows, but just not right for us, or
right.
What our take on kids' lives are and where we want to go. And if it's something that we can sort of think about and maybe mold to go in that direction, that'd be great. Otherwise, it may not be right for us. But I mean, for us, first and foremost, we sort of lead with what our identity is a network, and look for projects that follow that.
Brian, before we sat down here today, we were talking a little bit about shows from like our generation, or movies like Breakfast Club. What it was like to be a tween, to be a teen in the 80s and 90s, with what it's like today. Can you talk a little bit about how Nickelodeon sees the contrast to that? Like if you were to sell, or Samantha, like if you were to sell like say Kickstart was saying, well, we're gonna do a remake of The Breakfast Club. Like, I mean, there would be some very distinct differences in doing that movie today than in 1985. Like, how did both of you, in that you have a lot of youth-oriented productions. Nick is, youth. How do the two of you see see the whole life, the whole perspective, the whole world of a teen today than the tween teen of their parents' generation.
We spend a lot of time talking to kids about who they are and what their worlds are. We invest heavily in research about who kids are now in 2016, and that's different than who kids were in 2010, which is different from who kids were in 2000, and certainly different than when we were kids.
So seriously, like a 5-6 year difference, like kids in 2010, kids in 2016, it's a different kind of scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of, gradual differences, but you have to stay relevant with what's going on in kids' lives now, and we want to reflect that in our shows. And we talked about The Breakfast Club as an example. The archetypes that were really successfully used in that movie aren't the same as what kids go through today. Aren't what kids experience in their school today.
Yeah.
The bully would not be the hero in a movie today. The nerd could be the hero, right? So I think while it's true that teenagers are always going to experience alienation and conflict within their family and themselves as they're sort of finding out who they are, in that film specifically, the disconnect from the kids to their parents was so pronounced and was really sort of the basis for kind of what they experienced on that day, that they didn't feel connected to any adults in their lives. And that's not true of kids today. We know that kids today, a 10-year-old today, has a much different relationship with their parent than a 10-year-old in 1985 did.
Is it? Do you think a lot of it has to do just with the immediacy of communication, the technology?
I think so. I mean, I think it's also, I'm a parent, so I think probably also is maybe the parents are approaching those relationships differently and maybe setting a tone or trying to establish a different kind of relationship than maybe they had with their parents or that existed before. But yeah, there's certainly, the physical connection, whether through technology or whatever, is much different and more and closer. But you have to reflect that whoever you're writing about. If it's not a version of yourself, if you're writing for characters that aren't you, you have to know who those people are right now.
So Samantha, you wear 3 hats.
Yes.
You're an executive, you're a writer, you're a producer. What approach might you take now towards you've written holiday films, kid-oriented stuff, in terms of like writing a teen or a tween in 2016 than a project that you might have done in 2006?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think in part I'm having kind of my sales hat on, which is that right now in the tween space, it's really interesting, who's buying that kind of stuff. So that might be the first thing I might think of. But looking at things about, Generation X versus Generation Y versus the sort of kids coming out that were born sort of after 9/11, like that, there's a lot of just sort of history that informs that. So I think, honestly, it would be minute to minute. Like what you might pitch this year is going to be vastly different than what you pitch next year.
And Brian, would you say like that's something that the writers need to just accept that there's, you can't just be, for the lack of a better analogy, a dog chasing cars. Like, oh, here's a successful show on Nick. I'm going to do something exactly like the Thundermans, but they're going to wear a different color spandex, and then I'm going to pitch it to Brian, and it'll be a sale. Like what are like some common mistakes that new writers make when they go in to pitch?
I think it's true that networks are often looking to develop things, shows that can go with their current successful shows, but I think it's a mistake to interpret that to be so literal, that if we have a superhero show, well, surely I'm going to pitch that we must want another superhero show. I think the challenge would be to look at why that superhero show is successful, what are the elements of it, what seems to be working, what's a good show that could work with it, but that feels different, doesn't feel like another version of the same show. When you think about on any network, sort of successful pairings of shows, when networks have been able to kind of build success upon success, it's usually because they have developed things that feel different enough that they're still interesting, but to still retain some of the common elements, whether it's appeals to a certain demographic, or has tonally is similar, but about a very different subject, those kinds of things.
So would you two say that, what writers should really do is kind of concentrate and explore what their personal connection, their personal inspiration is in pitching a story and pitching a feature? Because it feels that, if like you both of you just pointed out, that you can't really keep up or write to the trend, because the trend's going to change 5 minutes from now.
Mm-hmm.
But what seems to not change so quickly is what the writer's personal motivation is, their personal inspiration might be for a feature.
Well, I think that's where the kind of the write what you know
Yeah.
sort of comes from. I think you'll find I've had this where people have come in and pitched me a variety of ideas, and then it turns out, I had one great writer who had like a really dark past. So he pitched me all these great, wonderful, upbeat things. And as he was leaving, I was like, what's the one thing you didn't want to pitch me?
Uh-huh.
And he pitched me that. And that was the thing that was incredibly personal. It was incredibly dark, but also incredibly powerful. And I said, let's work on that one.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing that when he spoke about it, there was just a whole other power to the story that the three ideas he thought I wanted to hear didn't have.
I think you're always in a pitch, you're always looking for, why is this the person to tell this story? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be their life story, and it can be any idea, but you're looking for some connection that writer has with that story to say, like, okay, no one else should be writing this except for you. Your take on this, your connection to it, what you want to say about this subject is so specific that you should be the person to tell the story.
Would the two of you also say that there's more to a meeting or to a pitch than just doing that pitch, that there are more possibilities involved in whether or not you just make a sale?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's almost a little bit like a job interview
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. Especially as a producer, if I'm meeting with a writer, this is someone where we're probably going to spend 6 to 9 months developing something, perhaps, before we take it out, depending on how quick we're going.
Is that good for both TV and feature?
TV can often be a little bit faster,
Okay.
but still, it's going to be a really long, ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
Let's say you set it up, then you're still developing it. You make it. You're going to be working with this person for a long time. So perhaps someone comes in with a great idea, but already you're like, we're not going to work well together. This might not be a good relationship. Versus someone who comes in, you just have a lot of rapport. They've got great ideas. Maybe you don't like this one. You say, hey, I have this book, take a look at this. And
Mm-hmm.
so that it's as much as part of the process as the pitch itself.
Brian, have you experienced that where like somebody comes in to pitch something where it's like, well, not quite for us, or we have something similar in contention, but hey, this person might be good for a staff job that might be coming up down the line?
Yeah, I mean, you always have stuff in your head that you're looking for writers for that might be different than what the person comes in for. But
Mm-hmm.
you meet a person and you immediately, okay, well, maybe this idea isn't right, but their sensibility, their take on characters, the humor that I'm getting from them, that could be perfect for this other thing that we've been talking about. Absolutely. I mean, I think the job interview analogy is the best one. I mean, it's
It's kind of a vetting process sometimes.
Right.
So I want to ask you guys, Samantha, I want to ask you what you feel, the essential elements need to be for pitching a feature. And Brian, what do you feel the essential elements need to be for pitching a television series?
Yeah, I mean, on a feature, one of the big things I would say for pitching in general is keep it under 20 minutes. I think that you want to give someone, it's almost like an appetizer. Like you want to give someone a taste of something,
Yeah.
the best possible flavors of what this could be, and allow questions. And questions allow someone to kind of put their own feeling into it, feel like they're emotionally invested. You don't want to give too much. So one is time. In a feature, you're pitching as much character as you are plot. So you need to get out something that is exciting, that feels both wonderfully character driven. These characters I want to stick with for an hour, learn all about them. That has this real great growth. But at the same time, for the most part, if you're pitching like a live action, you've got to have your set pieces.
Yeah.
So really, it's pitching almost like if you were writing a trailer. Like, what are those moments? Give someone just
What are
an
the trailer
impact
moments?
of the best parts of your pitch. I don't need every little scene, every little piece of dialogue. In fact, that can sort of water down the pitch. So
Sure.
I think it's fast. It's the best parts. Getting someone excited.
So if it were like a comedy, what are the big comedic set pieces? If it were horror, if it were an action, what are the big trailer moments? But what if somebody was pitching, say, more of a melodrama? Is there more of a concentration on the character for something like that?
Well, I would say, and everything has an exception, obviously, but I think from the buyer's perspective, something that is, unless it's based on a true story or you have sort of a really interesting piece of attachment to that, that's probably something that's better done as a screenplay, something where someone can be swept away in the moments. I think that's perhaps a little bit more difficult to artfully pitch. And also, some of those things you're thinking smaller budgets. I mean, it's sort of a little looking at kind of with everything, looking at your buyers, looking at how they seem to buy things, and then finding the best possible way to set it up.
So Brian, you've heard pitches, both at Nickelodeon, CBS. Is there just sort of a standard template in terms of television pitches that people need to hit these certain things, or does it change from network to network? What do you look for? What do you need when you hear a TV pitch?
I think the most important thing when you're pitching a television series to a network is to know where you are. And if you're pitching at Nickelodeon, understand that you're pitching to a kids television TV channel, and what you're pitching should obviously reflect that, but also you should have some awareness of what else is on Nickelodeon, and sort of what the recent history has been and where the trends have been. Just sort of know who you're pitching to and know where you're pitching. Obviously, you should not be pitching a HBO adult show at Nickelodeon or vice versa. I mean, you kind of have to target it to your audience. I think for a television pitch, it's maybe the biggest difference from a feature is I think it's less about pitching specific stories or the story of the pilot. In fact, I think as little of the pilot story as possible is probably good in a TV pitch. I think what you want to be pitching is character, setting, tone, and you can. I think the best pitches can convey story or moments through talking about characters and through talking about setting. You can talk about a character as the kind of guy who takes his shoes off in the movie theater, or or the kind of mom who overpacks lunches for her kids, or these moments that kind of describe the characters. But you can also see, I could see that in an episode. I could see that being a moment in something. So talk about the tone of the show. Obviously, there are a lot of different ways to tell a story about a brother and a sister can be told lots of different ways. So what is the way you're going to tell that story? These are the kind of things that are much more important than in the pilot, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. One of the reasons that I don't like to hear a lot of pilot story is that things can kind of change. And I mean, it's called development for a reason, is that once we're sort of developing the project and buying it, things may change, and the person you thought was a really important character maybe isn't as important, or vice versa. And so that pilot story will sort of develop through the course of the relationship.
So can we maybe talk, and you don't have to give specific names, but I'd like to just get your experiences on both ends of the spectrum. Like, what would say, what is the greatest pitching experience that you two have been a part of in the room? And if you want to give a shout out to a great pitcher, that's great. But at the same time, I would love to really hear what the pitches from hell were, what those experiences were, and maybe we could talk about some kind of the do's and don'ts in the room with that.
I think certainly length is always a consideration, and as Samantha said, 20 minutes is a great length for a pitch. That seems to be kind of around where you start to lose the room.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me just jump in for a second, Brian. So you'd mentioned that you shouldn't necessarily pitch too much about the pilot story,
Right.
But how much should the pilot story be a part of that?
I think you can talk about what's going to happen in the pilot, especially if it's the kind of show that feels either serialized or that's important to set up specific moments that will then be important later on. You can talk about what is going to happen in the pilot. I meant sort of the beats of each of the beats.
Yeah, but not like, okay, in this scene, this person
Right,
comes
right.
in.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. Don't spend 30 minutes
Yeah,
just
so you
telling
talk about
every
and if it's
single
the kind
moment.
Of, and it's
Yeah.
if it's the kind of series that is arced through the whole first season, or that that is important to talk about. I have the first 5 seasons thought out. Nobody wants to sit and hear about every episode for 5 seasons, but you can talk about in the first season, I see the character going through this, and that'll take us into the second season where I'd like, again, I think it's important to realize that the people you're pitching to, the people that are buying it, probably will want some say or to talk about maybe where it goes and the risk you run if you pitch things so specifically and in too much detail through 5 seasons is you had them until that thing you said was going to happen in season 3, which now they hate and now they don't want to buy. So you sort of have to pitch enough that you're going to sell the project, and then from that point on.
Well, is that just sort of a luck of the draw? Is there a fine line between pitching too much and pitching too vague? Is there?
There is.
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I think that you can pitch too vague if you don't give specifics about characters. If you just say, he's a funny guy, and they live in this weird town. Well, what about the town is weird? Like, that's what's going to paint the picture. The weird town where there's bodies buried, whatever that is, that's so
specificity of it?
specificity, but brevity.
Yeah.
There was an executive who used to have the word, he blew it up, I guess, for his assistant, the word concise, that was blown up behind him. So going to pitch him, we were like, we have got to be very specific. You felt rushed, but then he said, yeah, people came in and pitched in 20 minutes or less. You want to give people, like you were saying, enough of an in where they've been tantalized, and then they want to know more. They want to ask questions. They're engaged, and they feel like, oh, I can put my stamp on it. I can get involved in this. This is exciting.
And I think it's fine if you want to use other existing characters or actors as sort of archetypes for your character, but that can't be it. You just can't, you can't go in and say, he's a John Krasinski type, and he's gonna, it's like, we know what that means, I guess, but you have to demonstrate what's unique and specific about that character, and you have to give more detail, and then just hoping this sort of shorthand can sell it for you.
And are holding deals a little less prevalent than they used to be? Say, like, at Nickelodeon, maybe you have a young actor that you want to do a series with. Would you like hear pitches for something that would be a good vehicle for that particular person, or does a place like Nickelodeon, do you guys have, like, say, we want to develop something that specifically deals with, dolphins, or we have acquired the rights to. I'm just,
We don't make holding deals
to
with
like
dolphins,
Hardy
if that's what you're
Boys or
asking.
anything. Yeah.
We have no deals.
No
with
holding
dolphins.
deals.
No dolphin anymore.
Oh, no dolphins. Well, there goes that next question. All right.
We do, yeah. We still, I mean, a show can come out a variety of different ways. One of those ways is that you find, in our case, a young actor or actress that's just really special and really talented.
Yeah.
And you make a deal with that actor or actress, and then you develop ideas sort of against that or for that person. And yeah, that's certainly one way that we still do it.
Samantha, have you with Kickstart? I mean, you guys kind of develop your own materials, but you also acquire things too, right?
Yeah, so I mean, to the question you're asking about just sort of great pitches,
Yeah.
there's, we had some where we one of my favorite pitches we had this great graphic novel. We had a wonderful writer on board, but also this great director who took the graphic novel, made it into like a little animatic, had some actors on the pilot he was doing do the voices. So we came in with sort of this like audio visual that gave this great mood to sort of get everyone all kind of cooked on the idea. Then the writer took over and they had this great back and forth. So that
he
was
came in and he showed you like a 5-minute
yeah,
animatic?
So he had like just, there were a minute and a half that were
Minute and a
taking
half.
minutes, bits of the comic book and putting them up and sort of bringing them to life with music and mood. So I mean, that was a very wonderful scenario, but I feel like the game has been upped a little bit in the pitching space, where that at one point was over the top and now is a little almost like par for the course of really setting a mood, having a mood reel, having some images, all of those things helped. And that was still 22 minutes, and we sold, had bidding war on that one.
So Brian, have you seen that too? That people come in with more than just a verbal pitch, like they bring.
Yeah, I mean, it's as it's gotten easier to go out and either shoot something or put something together. If you're able, I don't think it's necessary, but if you're able to have something that can help you sell, that can demonstrate what your vision is, whether they are mood boards, whether it is a short that you're able to shoot, something that helps you. Yeah, I think that's becoming much more common.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more specifically in terms of the pitch. So somebody comes in, they have about 20 minutes to pitch it. They stress characters. They stress personal connection to it. They stress, say, like with TV, they talk about the pilot, but for other episodes. But for both for features and for TV, it's specificity. For features, it's the set piece moments, the trailer moments for it. What have you guys experienced? You don't have to give names, but what pitches from hell have you had to endure where someone just came in and did something that every person in this room should never even ponder or think about?
One thing you have to be aware of, especially if you're pitching an idea that's sort of a high concept idea or that's fantastical, you should have an idea. You should have some sense of where it goes. We all think of shows that we've loved that were great when they started because it's like, where's this going to go? And then you realize, like, oh, they don't know either. And it's like, and so I think everyone's sort of hip to that now. And so I think if you're going to pitch something that sort of requires some explanation or feels like it needs some thought beyond just where that first episode is, you better have that worked out because people are going to want to know. I think that's one thing that's really important.
So you don't necessarily, have to. You want to keep it to 20 minutes and anticipate that, ideally, if it goes well, that there will be questions and follow-ups that you would have prepared, but you're not going to just tell them every single thing, like you had mentioned, that season 3 thing that could be the deal breaker.
Right. You just want to demonstrate, I think, that you have a vision for this. And like you said, I mean, there will be questions, hopefully, good questions that kind of allow you to expand on what you're already pitching, that you can get into that.
But Samantha, is it also a question of, the writer being open to suggestions or a little bit of improvisation in the room?
Yeah, I would say it's a couple things. I've a lot of times we deal with being in the kind of fantasy genre space.
Yeah.
We're often dealing with big universes and big mythologies. So sometimes before a pitch where I have a big mythology, we might have a 40-minute thing that we've gone back and forth on to show the depth, and then we strip it down, but we've already answered all the questions so that writer can hopefully demonstrate the depth of that mythology. We just didn't decide to talk all about it. But I've also been in the room with some writers who are just very on their feet. So maybe even after all this back and forth and working, we didn't think of a question. And a lot of times I tell writers, like, if you don't know the answer, you still go, well, I was thinking, buy yourself 30 seconds and think of an answer. Because really, you want to just, say that, like, and by the way, as you've said, like, that pilot's probably going to change, that story's probably going to change, so much is going to change, but it's definitely good to, like, know your material and you wanting to build confidence in the executive that you know your story.
At DePaul, we have a lot of students who are working on different types of projects that involve science fiction or the supernatural, and one of the things that we talk about is like you just said, really try and streamline the rules, make it as simple as possible. Like, in this universe, you need to remember this, this, and this. But if it's like an entire laundry list of what's possible and what's not, you
Your
might
eyes roll back.
Yeah, exactly. Have you experienced that too, Brian? That somebody might come in with like a high concept show and not really know the rules to their own universe? Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. They haven't, or a high concept show that doesn't feel like a TV series, that feels like a movie. I mean, I think that's important to know too. That there are concepts that just work better as a beginning, middle, and end than something that can sort of generate an ongoing, years after years of storytelling.
That's something, yeah, I wanted to ask both of you guys about that. That, sometimes it seems that somebody has an unbelievably spectacular idea for a pilot, but then you see it, and is it something where you love the pilot idea, but you realize this is going to run out of steam in like episode 4? That is it a question of longevity, not just the specific story, but it's what the opportunities are for more stories, like conflict well maybe, or.
I think I think if you're pitching a TV show, you need to convey what the engine of that show is, where the story's going to come from, what's going to keep it going. Yeah, I think that without that, it is just going to feel like, well, we don't have. It's a really exciting, great premise for a pilot, but I don't see where it goes, or it feels like by the end of this pilot story we talked about, that sort of feels like the end. Like I don't know where are we going from there.
Yeah, and you might even feel that about. I mean, there's been some amazing shows that have these just phenomenal first seasons, and then that was. I mean, and it was great to tell it over the course of a season. It was much more interesting than as a movie, but then it is sort of hard to. So that is something I think you always think about: is how can you make sure you can answer that question.
Samantha, with how series seem to be not just hour-longs or not just Netflix shows, but comedies, how things seem to be more and more serialized. Is that something that that you guys are kind of gearing towards? Like when you go out with a television pitch, do you say, well, we should concentrate on this being more of a serialized thing, or is it okay to do more of a traditional kind of?
I'm always a big person of sort of finding a story where it wants to live.
Yeah.
So I think if you're trying to force something into a certain space, it's always, you're going to feel that on some level.
That it feels contrived.
It's going to feel, well, you're just going to feel it being shoved into that space. I've done that when we've taken something that maybe belonged in like the teen space, and you try to take it to tween, and then you realize you've lost the teeth, and the teeth were what make it interesting.
Yeah.
So we don't really operate that way. I think what's great about TV is there's so many buyers and so many different places to tell stories. If you find that sitcom, there's still a place for that sitcom, or if you have like a multicam sort of serialized comedy, there's a place for that. There's so many opportunities. Or if you have something that just is better told in 2 minutes, there's a million ways to get that on, out digitally. So I think it's finding where it makes sense.
I mean, you guys are kind of doing the whole spectrum of different media, the web series, comics, feature, television.
Yes.
Do you have a preferred medium? Do you have a area of choice?
Not really, honestly, just because I'll find a really great book and it works best as a feature. There's like one in particular right now that's this amazing author, and it's a sort of like really gritty kids movie, but that's something that belongs there. But then we have these series where I can't wait to hopefully tell 4 seasons of it, because there's so many amazing characters. So really it's like I just kind of fall in love with the projects, and then
Sure. And Brian, you've been working pretty much, your adult career in comedy. Was that like from the get-go, you're thinking, I really, you're a person that loves comedy, comedy. Is that the genre that you want to stay in and don't really want to veer into like the Hannibal type stuff, or
I
Game
like
of
all that stuff.
Thrones?
It has sort of worked out this way that I've been in comedy for my career. I mean, coming into this business, it was probably the genre that I knew best and was most familiar with just as a TV watcher.
Yeah.
So it's worked out, and the best thing about my job is getting to work with writers and producers and actors that I was just like fans of, and getting to meet people that that I would just watch their shows anyway. So I mean, I've worked on some alternative programming and reality, very few 1 hours. Although I've done some sort of comedic dramas. It's all fun, but yeah, I just sort of it was a good fit for me because that's what I kind of grew up on.
What do you feel like? It seems. I mean, there are successes, but it seems the hour-long dramedy is just a tougher nut to crack. Is it just keeping that flow going for an hour, keeping the humor going for an hour?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe oftentimes they tend to be maybe a little lighter in concept, and so it's hard to sustain. And I think the ones that work really well, if they don't have a great concept behind them, it's because the characters are really strong. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously the writing's great, but the characters are really well developed. But yeah, it does. Tonally, I guess it's a hard balance to pull off. That balance between comedy and drama, and finding where the tone of your specific show is. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a tougher needle to thread if you're trying to do something that balances both.
So I wanted to just briefly bring up the Nickelodeon, the fellowship. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Nickelodeon has a writers. It's called the Nickelodeon Writers Program, I believe it's called, and there is a Facebook page for it, where we solicit submissions from writers all over the world now. It's international, and the writers who submit themselves go through a series of Nickelodeon executives and writers read their materials, and we gets whittled down to a small group that goes through a series of interviews, first I think on the phone and then in person, until finally we have it's usually somewhere between 3 to 5 writers per year that are officially become Nickelodeon in the Nickelodeon Writers
And
Program.
they submit specs of existing Nickelodeon shows or
Yes.
original?
No,
pilot?
not Nickelodeon shows. It's specs of existing shows.
Just existing shows.
Right. And then once you're in the program for the year, you are living in Los Angeles and essentially working at Nickelodeon. And you can be, if there's room, you can be placed on a Nickelodeon show to kind of be kind of part of the writers' room and kind of we usually one or two writers a year end up. I try to get them on my shows and try to get them in the room and working on the show. We just had one of the Nickelodeon writers spent the last year in the School of Rock room, and the year before that, someone spent it in the Thunderman's room. You could be working on the animated side as well, and the animation studio. The writers end up working on those shows, and you get a year of really work experience and education, and you're also writing material at the same time. So hopefully by the end of that year, you have new material that you've been sort of supervised and help with. Hopefully by that time you're also ready to get a job on staff. And obviously the best success stories are the ones where the writers graduate from the program right on to Nickelodeon shows.
And you kind of learn the protocols of the writer's room and whatnot.
Yeah, and you sort of need to be in a room to learn that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's the kind of thing where just being in it, you sort of get how it goes.
So Samantha, I wanted to ask you, you've had a lot of experience in animation. Would you say the door might be cracked open a little wider than other places in terms of new writers, trying to get their first produced credits in the animation world? Is there a little bit more willingness to read work or submissions from new writers?
Well, I do deal a little bit more personally in the live action space, but I would actually say in the animation space, it's actually a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Quite often for selling a show, a writer needs significantly more produced work than if, let's say, I'm taking out a new writer in the live action TV space. So I would actually say the barrier to entry might be slightly higher, honestly, in the animation
But
space.
if they were like writing on like an animated series.
Oh
might
yeah,
that
if they already have I thought you meant kind of new writers. If they've already got
No, new writers, like if they were gonna like work, submit or sell a sort of like a freelance script to an established animated series, might that be a way to kind of break in?
that could be. I think that's really kind of at that point you're kind of going through like the showrunner.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like you need an agent to go to a showrunner. I have not experienced that where someone has sort of been like a freelance just submitting randomly to a show. I think there's some even legalities on accepting something like
Sure.
that.
But like you said before, when somebody comes in with an animated show, they like an animatic is a good idea.
Well, in that case, the animatic was not for an animated show. This was for a live action show.
But if someone is pitching an animated show to you, what would you like to see from that?
In that case, I would have read a writing sample, and then just a pitch is fine.
The
'Cause
pitch is fine.
Yeah.
They don't have to come in with the artwork.
No, I mean
or
it's
whatever.
a little bit different than going into a buyer. So with us, it's really just the concept that
Cool.
we could be starting from. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to be. Oh wow, we've already got a nice group lined up with questions already. We're going to be taking questions in just a second. If folks want to line up, I believe we're lining up over in this side to the mic. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So, in terms of like just the entire pitch process, that before you even really get in the room, it's something, and most of the time you need to have a manager, an agent that gets you that meeting, or through like a program that can somebody, Samantha, can somebody like maybe submit a query to you, and do they sometimes not necessarily have to have an agent before they can pitch to Kickstart?
I get query emails a lot. Generally, I'll respond, but it's pretty rare that we'll take something.
Yeah.
Just a lot of times we just sort of politely thank people, just because again, we deal with so much content. I don't want to.
There's just an influx of
It's
stuff that's
it's
huge.
just it's just a kind of volume.
Yeah.
There are also legal reasons
Also.
Right.
that you sort of have to be. You have to know where the material's coming from.
Like if someone submits something that takes place in a school, and they're like, oh well, your shows took place at a school. I'm suing because that was my idea that it would take
I
place
think
at
it's
a
just
school.
it's important to have sort of a representative as a conduit.
Yeah.
For a lot of those reasons.
Okay. So do we have our first question? Come on down, sir.
Is it on? Hi, thanks for doing this. I talked to Chris the other night at Midwest Independent Film Festival about this, but I wanted to expand and talk about where TV's going. And what I was talking to Chris about, I have this comedy, half-an-hour comedy, but it's really an adult-driven sort of idea of, I think we're going into, with all these different places to sell material, all these, the Hulus, the Amazons, and everything, that I feel like we're getting in this era of TV where we don't have to keep sort of these sort of core things, like it has to have a moral center that's sort of universally accepted. So for lack of a better phrase, imagine like an Office version of Reservoir Dogs or something. So could you talk a little bit about that, where as a person that's doing something unique, with a unique voice, but really, and also I want to paraphrase this, we watch reality TV where we watch pawnbrokers and ice, truckers driving across ice. So I think there's this postmodern kind of view that we can look at something or follow a group of people that are doing maybe unethical things or in a really weird situation, because we have this desire to experience that world, even though we're in this very clean world ourselves, and we don't have to like evaluate everything as such a moral background. So more where TV's going and opening up to more adult comedy.
Well, I would say that you kind of identified some of the various buyers. I think there are a lot more buyers. I think people are always looking, there's always something new where someone is completely unlikable, and right, and yet you're wanting to follow them.
The anti-hero.
Right, and they're great. I think it's again just going to come down to story and storytelling, and really how that is pitched. And do you feel like even if that person is one of the worst people in the world, is there someone slightly worse than them, so you can kind of root for that guy? Then I think you're sort of doing well. But I think again, it's, if you're talking about selling the pitch, it's going to come down to does that world, if it's an ice road trucking, feel unique and different, characters I haven't seen. Can I watch this for 4, 5, 6 seasons?
And do they feel like real characters, even though somebody might be doing something that's despicable or immoral or whatever? Does it feel real? Does that person feel real? Are they dimensionalized beyond just, are they defined beyond just by the thing that you're saying they're doing or they're saying they are? And again, I mean, you sort of, I think, identified the places for a show like that. Again, you sort of know where you are, know who you're pitching to, because there are a lot of places that will be open to shows like that. There are also going to be places that are not going to be. And just make sure you're in the right place.
We were kind of talking about the anti-hero the other day, and it seems the formula that is almost universal is they can be as despicable as they want, as long as there's one thing that they're better than everybody else at. It's okay, you know.
Right.
So
yeah, I think that's the thing is find those other elements to that character that, you know, if he's a serial killer, what else is he?
yeah,
You know, and if you can define those and you can do it well, you can have a successful show about a serial killer.
that little humane part, you know, of Dexter or what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess we've got one more question.
Yeah, I had a question. Samantha, I think you were talking about a writer who was pitching a number of things. So can you talk about like maybe different types of pitches? Is that like an agent that just wanted you to meet this particular writer and so he had a number of things to discuss with you, or do you just kind of launch into a 20-minute
You know,
pitch?
that was sort of a unique instance when we were we were filling out a comic book slate, and so I was looking for ideas. So in that case, and that was sort of like a writer that I'd worked with before, so it was a little bit more of a friendly relationship or kind of a more, I don't know, casual sort of thing. I think generally, you want to come in with like one specific thing you really, really believe in. And then if you're chatting at the end, what else are you working on? You can kind of bring up some of those other things. But I would say, contrary to that particular instance, you probably don't want to come into a meeting with just like a laundry list of like 7 to 8.
It's like Brian, you'd mentioned
That
that
literally
before.
happened
Yeah,
to me, yeah, where someone came in and pulled out a list, and I could just see how much was written on this list, and it was like, he goes, okay, so I have a show about a guy and his dog, and they do this, and I was like, I don't know. He goes, okay, I have a show about it's outer space, and this happens. Like, okay. I also have, and it was like, and I was, you know, and
it's like eggs, bacon, milk.
yeah,
or,
I mean, and the only thing that's conveying is like you don't care about any of these a lot. They're just sort of ideas, and you know, you have to come in with the one thing that you want to sell, and that you
What's
feel
that
most,
personal
that
connection?
you want to feel most passionate about. Yeah.
So to just kind of sum our time up, can each of you maybe leave us with you know one, you know, the one most important thing that you feel a writer should know before coming out to LA?
I don't know. I was gonna be
Or
really
two.
I was gonna be really sarcastic, be like, don't do it. No, but actually, I would say to that end, you have to be if you're gonna come out and you're gonna be in it, you have to be ready to be told no a million times and have a very thick skin, because it's a long haul, and it's honestly, there's some people who get lucky right away. Maybe you don't want to be that person because you need to learn what you're doing wrong. It's an uphill battle, and someone said this to me when I was in film school. They said, you know, don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Just worry if you've got some momentum. And if your momentum stops, take a look and realize, why isn't something working? What am I doing wrong? But I think really the big thing is it's always a slog. And even once you sell a show and you have a successful show, now it's like, what's your next show? Like,
Yeah.
what's the next thing you're doing? It's always about
Yeah.
the next thing. So it's like a marathon, like tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I
not a
was going to say a
sprint.
version of the same thing, but be prepared to work hard at it and persevere, and don't think that success is going to happen overnight, or don't think that because it didn't happen overnight, that means that it's not going to happen. I mean, I think for television, one of the best things you can do when you come to LA is just try to start working anywhere you can in the business. Doesn't matter what the job is, doesn't matter what, just sort of get in any way you can. Most people who are working in the business started doing something that wasn't what they wanted to be doing, or isn't what they're sort of currently successful at. But once you're in it, you start meeting people, and eventually you can sort of work your way over to sort of that segment of the business you want to be in. and you can meet the people that can help you and that can, you know, maybe become a mentor. But there are a lot of the writers that we work with started out in television and other areas doing something and found their way sort of into the writer's room. A lot of the people we have working on our shows as PAs and in post-production and as assistants, they want to be writers, and they're going to be writers, and they are writers, and they're going to be successful writers because they're making the relationships and they're getting themselves in position to sort of make that happen.
Be ready to pay your dues.
Yeah.
And you'll learn a lot. I mean, when you're paying your dues, read a lot, be eager.
And keep writing.
Yeah.
There's anybody who reads a piece of your material, likes it, they're just going to want to read something else. They're going to want to read more, and you should always have new things ready. You should always have, you know, sort of relevant, up-to-date material ready. Just keep writing and have a strong portfolio of material.
Well, guys, please thank Samantha and Brian.
Thank you.